Hello, I'm Adam Fleming, and this is Antisocial from BBC Radio 4. Each episode, we take one subject that's big online and look at it from a load of different angles. Like a live stream of the Vatican chimney, but with facts and evidence coming out, rather than wisps of smoke. This week, a sizable group of Labour MPs say they are opposed to government plans to cut the benefits paid to disabled people. Ministers say they're trying to manage a budget that's ballooning because of more claims from the young and from people with mental health conditions. Cue a debate online about who's worthy of help and how much.
1,000 people every day are signing on to personal independence payments. 1,000 a day. That's over the course of a year, size of the city of Manchester.
I do not understand how they can be cutting things for the most vulnerable.
There are millions of people across the country that absolutely could be working, that could be contributing, that could be doing something with their lives, and yet the system has incentivised them not to.
It is degrading. It makes you focus on everything you can't do rather than things you can. I sit there and sob.
How the benefits system works will sort the PIPs from the DLA from the UC. The annual sickness benefits bill is heading for £60 billion. No one knows why exactly, but we'll look at the theories. And people have become social media superstars by explaining how to claim successfully. We'll meet the people that the papers call illfluencers. And if you want to get involved in the discussion online, you can use the hashtag BBC Antisocial. And with me throughout this episode of Antisocial are two people who come at this discussion from different perspectives. Adam Gabsi is here in the studio. He's the co-chair of Inclusion London, a group that supports deaf and disabled people across the capital. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Adam. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How would you explain the work of Inclusion London?
Inclusion London is a deaf and disabled people's organisation. We campaign for equality, rights and justice. As a disabled person, I know firsthand how vital PIP is for independence and dignity, and I'm here to strongly oppose any cuts to this essential support.
Okay, and you were actually just across the road at Parliament the other day there lobbying Labour MPs. And I think maybe rather less than the politics, we'll try and get into just some of the kind of the issues and the opinions and the culture around this conversation. But also joining us on the line is Lana Hempsall, who's an entrepreneur and a Conservative councillor from Norfolk. Hello, Lana.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, lunchtime.
Yes, or for people listening to the podcast, anytime. Now, Lana, you've been registered blind since your mid-teens. Has that linked to your politics and the political activism that you do?
I wish that was true. My political activism stems from where I went to school. I went to school in former Yugoslavia, which was a fairly new country, and the political aspect of how the country was formed, where it sits in the international community, I found all of that really exciting and interesting. So I took first an interest in foreign affairs and later on in all aspects of politics. So yes and no.
Okay. And Adam, is your kind of like political awakening related to the conditions that you live with?
Yes, I'm a wheelchair user. I have multiple sclerosis. My political awakening was following the tragedy at Grenfell, because I live on the 6th floor, and understanding that there are problems in society that need to be solved. Disabled people face barriers in society every day. Luckily, the transport system here, the station is step-free. But there are numerous, there are 272 underground stations, 92 of which are step-free. So it's 1/3. So there are still huge barriers to overcome.
Okay. And is the changes to PIP, is that kind of like the main thing that you're focusing on at the moment?
That is a huge barrier.
Okay. And Lana, are you getting involved in this whole debate and consultation around the changes to disability benefits that were unveiled earlier this year?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I am, because I have, through my life, I've had strong opinions and views on how disabled people are supported into work, how they're supported into personal agency. And the Green Paper and what Liz Kendall unveiled, I feel could be an important first step in actually restructuring how disabled people are included in society.
Yeah, because Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, when she unveiled those cuts to disability benefits in March that she proposed, she also proposed spending an extra £1 billion a year on helping people get into work. Right, let's dive into the discussion. But before we do that, much of the online debate around the UK's disability benefits bill has centred around PIP, that's personal independence payments. So what are they and who can claim them? I got help from Emma Tracy, my colleague who is the presenter of Access All, the BBC's disability and mental health podcast.
Personal independence payments are a non-means test benefit for people of working age who need some support getting around or with daily tasks or both.
And yeah, talk about the criteria by which people are assessed for how much PIP they're going to get.
It's a big process. Before you start filling in the form, you contact the DWP, tell them you think that you are eligible. They send you a big form, and it's all about what you struggle with and what you can't do, which can be really difficult for some people to be really honest about. And you have to talk about kind of your bad days and your worst day. It's based on a point system from 1 to 12. There's 2 elements. There's the mobility element, which is around getting about and managing journeys. And then there's the daily living element, which is about communicating, eating, dressing, reading, all of those daily tasks. And you are scored on a points system from 1 to 12. If you get from 8 to 11 points, you get the standard rate of PIP in either of those elements. If you get 12 points or over, you get the enhanced rates.
So Emma, just spell out the actual rates of personal independence payments, the thing that we're talking about here.
So every week for the daily living amount and the standard rate, you get £73.90. And for the enhanced rate, you get £110.40. And for the mobility element, for the standard rate, you have £29.20. And for the enhanced rate, £77.05. And that's per week.
So for the daily living component of personal independence payments, there's all these categories of kind of daily life where a person is assessed and they get a score for each category, and the combination of the scores then helps the state decide what level of PIP they get.
Yes, it goes then to assessment. So you then have to do either a phone assessment or a face-to-face assessment. They look at how you look in the assessment. They might ask you to do some tasks as well. So it's a way of kind of getting to know you a little bit better to help make the decision.
Do people get reassessed?
People can be assessed every 1 to 10 years, depending on their situation. So someone with an impairment that might be unlikely to fluctuate will get assessed every 10 years. Someone with a fluctuating condition will get assessed every 1 or 3 years.
And just to be clear, somebody living with anxiety or ADHD could be eligible for PIP under certain circumstances if they score enough points.
Yeah, there isn't a list of disabilities on the website. It's about what you struggle with. So if you struggle to leave the house, that will affect your mobility. It will affect your ability to make and manage journeys. It's kind of supposed to meet the extra costs of being disabled or having a medical condition. You know, you might use it for a cleaner if you can't clean your house. The mobility element, if you get the enhanced rate, you can forgo that and get a mobility car, which means that you might be able to get yourself to work if public transport is hard for you, that kind of thing.
And then the changes that were proposed by Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, in March to PIP. Just sketch them out for us.
Basically, what they are proposing is that you have to get at least 4 points on one activity. So, as I said, 8 points you need for the standard rate, 12 points for the enhanced rate. But in this situation, next year, they're hoping to bring in that you can't build that up with 1 point for dressing, 2 points for communicating, 3 points for reading. You have to get 4 points on one to get any. And what a lot of disabled people tell me is that that will affect a lot of people with, as you mentioned earlier, mental health issues, maybe who are neurodivergent, who need a little bit of help with a lot of things.
And you could end up in a situation where someone is applying, gets 3 points in every single category, which adds up to way more than 8 points in total. But because no one category got 4 points, they get no PIP.
That's right. And that will apply to reassessments as well.
But also, isn't there an argument from some of the wonks in this space that actually what tends to happen if you tighten up criteria in this way is that people will just try and get the higher reward and higher points?
Yeah, that is definitely an argument. It's a very difficult process, Adam, is what disabled people tell me. There's a lot to go through. There's a lot of talking about what you can't do. And if you don't qualify for the benefit, there's a big appeal system as well, which can be very draining too. So it is a lot of work for a disabled person to go through, or a sick person to get personal independence payments. I think that's really important to make that very clear as well.
Do we know how much these changes will save the government?
The Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that between the changes to universal credit and the changes to personal independence payment, the government will save £4.8 billion per year by the end of the decade.
Thank you to Emma Tracy, and her podcast Access All is available on BBC Sounds. Lana, earlier on you were sounding quite sympathetic to these reforms that were proposed by Liz Kendall. Just make the case for why you think they're justified.
Well, in my opinion, the benefit system, and Emma's made a really good case for what I'm about to say, is that the benefit system currently, it's a trap. It's a financial trap rather than being a springboard for people with disabilities. And I fundamentally object to that entrapment into this, what looks like a gilded cage.
Just explain why you use that word trap. What is the trap here?
Well, Emma did actually say is that what you end up having to do is demonstrate how incapable you are in certain aspects in order to get more money. Now, because disabled people face hideous difficulties, hideous barriers when it comes to accessing work, getting a well-paid job, maintaining that well-paid job, to maintain that, and gain that personal agency in their life. What we are funneled into doing instead is applying for benefits, because your choice is simple. 100 job applications, of which none of them could be successful, or the one application you can work on really hard and get at least some money, and then the passported benefits to go with that. It forces disabled people down a route of handing over their personal agency to the government and whoever else is handing
but Lana,
out.
the PIPs, which is the benefits that we're talking about today, they're not related to whether someone can work or not. They're not related to your income or not. You get them if the system judges you need the help for the condition that you're living with.
It's true, and there are additional expenses to being, when you are disabled, from transport to personal assistance to adaptations at home. However, if disabled people were supported into work better, we would probably be able to pay for those ourselves and not really have to wait and beg and be subject to the government handouts.
Adam, why don't you react to some of the things Lana's been saying there?
I agree with the point that the government needs to assist disabled people to work better. But I would like to highlight that 41% of new PIP claimants are currently in work. So cutting PIP will actually affect disabled people that are in work, that need that support to stay in work.
But hang on there, isn't the argument there that if the work was better paid, then the person would be able to fund the help that they need to live their life, whether it's buying a bit of kit to help them, rather than relying on a state benefit?
I think society generally is broken. So
whole other episode of Antisocial, a whole other series of Antisocial.
PIP is not an out of work benefit. It's to cover extra costs, and disabled people face numerous extra costs. And we need the benefit to stay in work and to access work. So the government is almost trying to run before it can walk. There are still problems in society that need to be fixed, and therefore what confuses me is the government are telling disabled people to work when the workplace is not welcoming. There is still discrimination in the workplace. There is a reluctance from employers to hire disabled people. Flexible working conditions are not there. So working from home, the hours you have to work, they're not fluctuating. They're not changing. So there are still barriers that we need to overcome.
But all those barriers in the workplace, doesn't that make Lana's case, which is that it's easier to rely on benefits from the state rather than go and get a job? So in that sense, it is a bit of a trap, maybe.
Well,
no, if not a trap, then receiving benefits is a better option than working.
Well, no. I don't think so. There are disabled people that cannot work. That are sick, that can't work. And they need to be considered. They need PIP with the rising costs of everything. As a disabled person that uses a powered wheelchair, I also sleep on an air mattress, and I have numerous adaptive equipment that increases my costs. So PIP does cover that extra cost, and so it's not as simple as...
do you know what? Let me put that to Lana. So Lana, imagine a situation where the disabled person goes out, gets the job, they've got a great employer, a great workplace, but actually they still need extra financial support to, for example, pay for the wheelchair that they use. How do you design a system that takes account of the extra costs?
I'm not disagreeing with that. There are additional costs, and technology is the disabled people's great friend when it comes to advancements in technologies that actually makes our life and employment much easier. However, we are typically disabled people work in low income jobs. There's the barriers to promotion, the barriers to opportunity, they have a cumulative effect on people. They start in childhood, and by the time you reach your 30s, 40s, your peers will have advanced tremendously, even though they perhaps, they weren't brighter at school, they weren't better at anything than you, but they don't have a disability. So we cumulatively get left behind, and that goes for our earnings as well. So having that additional money is great. However, it would be even better if those barriers were removed and those higher paying jobs were available to us, because for example, I am really glad that because of my site, I use a particular product from Apple, and I'm completely wedded to this product. However, I'm really glad that I can buy that with my own earnings now.
Okay.
Does that make sense? It's that sense of empowerment. I don't have to wait, and I don't have to sit here in trepidation to find out what the next, pensions, DWP, Secretary of State is going to do to the benefit system.
Okay.
It's like,
Adam, Lana talked about that sense of trepidation because actually the amount of money you get to pay for the stuff that you need is in the hands of the system, and it's the decision of a minister, and it's linked to what happened. The inflation rate last year happened to be on a certain day.
Yeah, and at the same time, MPs are getting a pay rise. Yeah, so I'd like to know Lana's opinion on that, to be honest, because, that seems completely unfair, and the timing of it also is unfair. The government is selling the idea that welfare spending is out of control, but it's not backed by facts. Working age benefits spending is actually lower now as a share of GDP than it was in 2008. The rise in disability claims reflects real need, not runaway costs. So there is a lot of political spin that isn't based in facts. So the way the government is selling this is incorrect.
Okay. We can talk about the wider politics later on in the programme, but just focusing on the system that we've got now, Adam, just wondering, going through the PIP process, like how does it feel?
It's very degrading.
Because
a disabled person could have to explain that they need assistance to use the toilet. Yeah, it's not something you'd willingly share with someone. the troubles I have day in, day out with mobility problems. It's just very degrading. And you have to constantly over and over again jump through hoops. And I feel it's incredibly unfair. The DWP do put disabled people in a very bad situation.
But how do you design a system where those questions aren't asked? I mean, is there ever going to be a way around that?
Yeah, I think certain conditions should be left alone, in my opinion, right? Because by constantly assessing...
But wouldn't you still have to demonstrate the condition in some way?
Yeah, of course. PIP is not easy. I feel like there's this idea that you go to the doctor, you say that you're sick, and the doctor opens a magic money drawer. Yeah, it doesn't happen that way. You have to have supporting evidence. And therefore, what's happening now is the questioning of my neurologist. Yeah, this is someone that's highly educated. He's assessed me, supports me, has, numerous evidence that I am disabled. But therefore, I still have to justify it to someone who's not necessarily has a medical background from the DWP that I am worthy, I'm disabled enough to receive these benefits.
But I just think, isn't there always going to have to be some kind of due diligence for the spending of public money? Because that's what this is.
In the first instance, of course, I agree. What I disagree with is the constant reassessment and the justification of the fact I'm disabled enough. That I feel that is not fair.
But isn't there flexibility in the system? Because some people who've got conditions that can fluctuate get reassessed every 1 year or every 3 years, but somebody who's got a permanent condition that doesn't fluctuate, it's maybe once a decade.
Of course, and I do understand that someone with a bad arm could get better, but I'm saying if you have a condition like mine, multiple sclerosis, is a degenerative condition, so therefore it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
So why we made to jump through hoops is the justification process that doesn't sit well with me at all.
Okay, Lana, what do you think about the process that we've got at the moment? Is it too intrusive? Is it just a bit mean?
It depends whose position you're taking. If you're Rachel Reeves, who's trying to make ends meet, and if you're Liz Kendall, then actually, and actually, if you're
well, let's put them to one side because they do plenty of interviews on other Radio 4 programmes. What about the person who's going through the assessment, who's being asked these intrusive questions, as they might see it? Are those intrusive questions justified?
Well, I'm going to push back on that slightly because this is taxpayers' money, right? And I think there is a justification in ensuring that people who are in receipt of benefits are genuinely entitled to receive them.
Yeah, but there's a choice about the process that you apply and how intrusive the questions are and how often you ask the questions again.
And again, there is a justification when you're spending taxpayers' money to ensure that eligibility continues to be the case. But what lies within this, what is hidden as part of it, is that even in the argument, even in this pushback against the cuts to PIP, it's like disabled people, that we are all just a homogenous type of person with a homogenous, where our ability and disability all conform to the PIP scale, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
Right. Let's get some numbers now, actually, because the disability benefits bill has gone up really, really sharply over the last couple of years. We wanted to find out what was driving this and actually just how much money we're talking about here. So we spoke to Tom Waters, who's Associate Director at the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the think tank, and got him to crunch some numbers for us.
There's basically two kinds of benefits you can get for ill health in the UK. One of them people typically call incapacity benefits. That's aimed at people who are unable to work because of their health condition. And the other half is called disability benefits. That's for people who have higher costs of living because of their condition. So you might think, they can't get around as easily, so they need to take more public transport, or they need help preparing meals or getting changed, and those sorts of things.
And what's a useful way of thinking of the total bill for that?
At the moment, the total bill is £56 billion. So that's quite significant. It's kind of in the order of the amount that we spend on defence, for example.
And where do we think that total is heading in future?
So the official forecast is for it to increase. The government recently made some policy reforms which are designed to cut the bill back, but it's more like they're slowing the increase, really, rather than making a cut from where we are now. So the expectation is still for it to rise to more than £60 billion by the end of the decade.
So it's heading for £60 billion. It's currently at £56 billion. What was it before?
If we went back just to before the pandemic, it was 37 billion. So we've really seen quite a big rise, 37 to 56 billion in the space of 4 or 5 years. What's going on is we've just seen a lot more people claiming these benefits than we used to. So to give a kind of a sense of scale, it used to be that every month about 20,000 people would start a claim for disability benefits. Now that number's 40,000 or 50,000. So the inflow into these benefits has risen quite dramatically.
Oh, wow. So just the number of new people entering the system has doubled or more than doubled each month.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Let's talk about factors. Talk me through the factors that people in your field are looking at to explain this massive increase.
So big picture, I don't think anyone's got a really clear explanation, a really certain explanation about what's going on. So one thing you might think is, well, these are health-related benefits. So insofar as the health of the population gets worse, that's going to obviously increase the number of people on these benefits. I think we do have some good evidence that mental health problems, which make up quite a large share of people on these benefits, that those mental health problems do seem to have got worse since the pandemic. That probably is a contributing factor, but it hasn't been the same sort of very sharp worsening in mental health that we've seen in terms of the sharp increase in number of people getting these benefits. So I think that's probably a factor, but it's probably not everything. In some ways, these benefits have become a bit easier to claim. So in the sense that the process for getting them has become a bit more straightforward. It used to be you'd have to go in for an in-person assessment. That typically doesn't happen anymore. You now can do it on the phone. Perhaps making it a bit easier to claim has made it more likely that people go through the rather long and quite unpleasant application process. Perhaps another thing you might think about is we had the cost of living crisis. That means that in real terms, people's incomes go down, and that perhaps causes people to apply for these benefits. I think that might be a contributing factor, but one quite important thing here is when we look across other countries that have got similar benefits to these, we don't really see this same pattern across really any other developed country. But of course, other countries did have the cost of living crisis. So it kind of can't be that alone, but that might be another factor explaining what's going on.
When you do international comparisons with countries that are kind of similar to the UK does look unique in all of these respects.
The UK definitely looks unique in terms of the change in the number of people getting health-related benefits. We just don't really see any other country having a remotely comparable rise, nothing like the kind of increases that we've seen.
Also, what's happening with the age profile of people who are entering the benefit system? Because it seems that's changed over time as well.
That's right. So there's definitely been a shift towards younger people getting on these benefits. So if you look at people in their 20s, about 6 or 7% of them now are on health-related benefits. It's still the case that you're more likely to be on these benefits if you're in your 50s than if you're in your 20s, but that differential has closed a bit.
What do we think is driving the increasing number of young people to get into the benefit system in this way?
I think it's pretty difficult to say. We do know that younger people are much more likely to get disability benefits for mental health problems than older people. If you look at 20-year-olds on disability benefits, it's something in the order of 70 or 80% of them get it for mental health problems. It's kind of difficult to say why we've seen a sharper rise there. In some cases, some of these younger people have had their schooling or their university experience interrupted by the pandemic. Perhaps that has a real outsized effect. that's just a hypothesis. I don't think we've got a really clear idea about what the driver is.
As a nerd in this area, and I mean that respectfully, what is one thing you would just love to know about this that would help you understand it even better?
I think the thing that I'd really like to know is how does the change in the way that we assess people for these benefits, so the switch from face-to-face assessments to on-the-phone assessments, what contribution has that had? I think it's difficult to get at that, but that would be a great piece of evidence to have and would really help us understand what's going on.
Thanks to Tom Waters from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And if you'd like to get involved in the conversation we're having on Antisocial, you can go online and use the hashtag BBC Antisocial, and we'd love to hear from you. Okay, Adam, let's focus in on this issue about the rising number of young people entering the disability benefit system and the fact that the big causes of that seem to be they're reporting mental health conditions. What's your theory about what is going on there? Do you have a theory about that?
I do. We're finally recognising invisible impairments. So when you do go to an accessible toilet, it does say not every disability is visible, and that seems to be accepted. But as soon as you leave the toilet, there are questions, right? We're questioning someone's suitability and eligibility for benefits. I personally don't even like the term benefits because it's a hard-won recognition, you know, that you're disabled and there are extra costs. So really...
Oh, hang on. Let's park that one because that language is always an interesting thing on these programs. We'll come back to that in a second. But so just to when you talk about visible and invisible disabilities, I mean, the fact is the PIP system, which has been around for over a decade now, does include categories for things like people who have difficulty engaging with another person face to face or making a budgeting decision. So actually, that's been in there the whole time. That's been recognised the whole time, hasn't it?
There's more acceptance now. I mean, like, you know, everyone was locked in a house for a couple of years, 3 years, and then we're facing the effects now of potentially what happened then. You're forcing mental health issues, and therefore there are more claimants, you know. We have a broken health system, right? So
but just on your point about the pandemic, so you think the lockdowns created a generation of people who've got loads more mental health problems?
Of course, and trying to access a therapist is virtually impossible. Using the NHS is virtually impossible.
I suppose that's about resources for getting a service. We're talking about the money, the financial support people get to live with their conditions, which is different.
Well, I agree, but it kind of goes together. I mean, like, if people can't access help for their mental health condition, it's just you're allowing.
It then leads them into the benefit system instead.
Yeah.
Okay, Lana, just pick up on that point about. Do you have a theory about what's driving that huge increase in the number of young people applying for PIP and applying for it for mental health conditions like anxiety?
Well, I'm going to add to those figures that Tom just gave us, because in addition to about 70% of young people under 25 who are accessing these benefits who have mental health issues, about 86% of people who do claim disability-related benefits report that they have a mental health condition that significantly adds to that. And about 1.3 million of total claimants do receive them because their main condition is a mental health problem. And from my experiences working as a councillor for many years, I know that the mental health trusts up and down the country are on their knees. The Norfolk and Suffolk Mental Health Trust, forgive me if that's no longer correct, but has been words and special measures for longer than I can remember.
But that's back to Adam's point about that you solve that by putting more resources into the provision of healthcare. What about helping people live with their conditions in the medium and long term?
Well, and that's another point. It's so a number of years ago, there was a push to bring parity to mental health and physical conditions, but rather than putting the same amount of resource into research for new treatment, all we brought parity into is how these are treated when it comes to the benefit system. You know, for all intents and purposes, how we treat depression and anxiety hasn't changed since the 60s. And that is a huge problem. When you go to your GP, when you are having issues, you'll be put onto antidepressants or beta blockers, depending on how you're doing, and sent away to see if those work for a while.
I mean, Adam, just explain to listeners of the programme why it is that the payment you receive to pay for your wheelchair that you use all day, every day, why somebody who's got depression should receive, well, the same payment.
Because PIP enables independence. So for people who struggle with motivation, concentration, or have social anxiety, PIP can fund coping strategies or support services that allow them to live more independently. So there are real barriers. If you've ever encountered someone with mental health issues, this is a serious problem and can stop someone from accessing society. So people do need support. And yeah.
Yeah, Lana, what do you make of that argument?
I would say that the last thing that you need to give somebody with a mental health condition is a life on benefits, because that completely removes the last vestiges of their personal agency and drive to get back in.
Adam wants to say something about that.
So how do you propose that we fix this situation? You and I agree that all services need to be fixed there. So when you apply for a doctor's appointment, you should be able to access your doctor. The NHS needs fixing. There's a lot of broken systems. And therefore, to cover the extra costs that people need, they seem to be going to PIP.
Well, let me put it another way to you, Lana. Can you imagine a situation where somebody who is living with depression actually is entitled to PIP, and that PIP is genuinely going to help them live a more independent life? Or is that just never going to be the case?
So somebody who's living with depression or anxiety or one of those, can I just please make clear that we are not talking about the severe aspect of mental health. We're not talking about schizophrenia. We're not talking about, we're pushing those aside. We're talking about depression and anxiety. People with depression and anxiety need therapy. They need coaching. They don't need a life on benefits. That is potentially the worst thing that you can do for somebody with that type of mental health condition.
But you're characterising it as a life on benefits. What if it was characterised as some money to help them deal with the challenges they face in their life, which is not the same as a life on benefits?
Well, if you give somebody with depression, if they have access to the right sort of therapy, the right sort of coaching, 5-6 years down the line, they'll get to a point where this is no longer a key factor in their life. Even people do.
But they might need some support
from
for those
mental health conditions.
But what if they need support from the state in those 5 to 6 years while they're on that journey?
That support should come as therapy and treatment for their mental health condition. There is. I think it's. Personally, I think it's unforgivable to trap them further, because putting them on benefits, quite literally, if mental health is about, in part, your frame of mind and how you deal with overwhelm, how you deal with the outside world, actually removing that and make it just... Trapping you in that place is the worst thing you can do.
Okay, and we've heard you making that point, but I want to move on a bit now, because I want to talk about this phenomenon on social media of people providing lots of advice about how to navigate the PIP system. And producer Josephine Casserly has been navigating that world for us this week. Hello, Josephine.
Hello.
So is this something that is happening a lot, all this advice about PIPs on TikTok and YouTube, etc.?
Yeah, so there is a whole world out there of TikTok influencers and YouTubers who are breaking down different aspects of the PIP application process and guiding their followers through it.
And that's proved quite controversial in some quarters.
Yeah, it has. So they were mentioned in a documentary made by Fraser Nelson for Channel 4 Dispatches, and they've been dubbed sickfluencers or illfluencers by the Daily Mail and the Times. This is an example of a headline from the Daily Mail. So the rise of the sickfluencer, how TikTokers and YouTubers are telling their followers to maximise their sick and disability benefits.
And who are the people behind these accounts?
Well, I'll give you first some examples of the kind of content that's out there. So here are some clips.
Get your pens and paper, guys, because you need to write this down. These are the two methods that you're going to be assessed on, all right? And I'm going to make it as simple as possible for you. Okay?
And welcome back to the channel. I'm Richard, one part of the Dynamic Duo UK, and today we're going to be talking about PIP assessors, or PIP assessors questions rather, and how to combat their lies or ways that they try to trick you.
Thinking of writing no change on your PIP renewal? Think again. Hi, I'm James. I'm a registered nurse and a former PIP assessor.
If your PIP has just been taken away because you started working and that has been used as a premise to question your disability or long-term health condition, then this TikTok is for you.
So the people making this content are a mix of people who suffer from chronic illnesses themselves, people who are lawyers, nurses and former PIP assessors. I've spoken to a couple of the people who run these kind of accounts and they hate the term sickfluencer or influencer. For example, James Morrell, who you just heard, he's a nurse and a former PIP assessor. He told me that he doesn't see himself as an influencer. He does not like the term sickfluencer, and he describes himself as a qualified professional who is trying to help people.
And what kind of advice do they offer?
They're mostly talking people through the process, through the application process. So, for example, some provide free toolkits, PDFs on how to navigate the application. And there are all sorts of topics like PIP for fibromyalgia, PIP for ADHD, PIP for anxiety, the assessment process, the renewal process, appeals. One example is a YouTuber called Charlie Anderson. She has a chronic illness herself and she makes videos explaining the PIP process in depth. And she has 50,000 subscribers.
Hi everyone, my name's Charlie and I have 100% success rate of winning PIP. That's whether it's claims, mandatory reconsiderations, which is the posh word for appeal, reviews, and I've only done one tribunal, but we won. Okay, so 100% success rate. I also suffer from chronic illness myself.
So the title of one of her videos is Unlock the Secret Steps for Caps Lock Winning Your PIP Claims, step-by-step guide, and it has 400,000 views. This has been picked up by some of the press coverage, for example, in the Daily Mail. And the title of the video might make it sound like it's helping people to game the system. But when you actually watch it, the video itself is 1 hour and 48 minutes. And it is an extremely detailed and painstaking walk through the PIP application process. And actually not gimmicky or scammy as the title of the video might suggest.
You need to really think about your situation, and I guarantee you, if you're in pain and struggling with fatigue, you've already adapted, and because it's your normal daily life now, you probably wouldn't even mention this. Bedwetting. If you're having accidents in bed, you need to write it. And remember, I know it's embarrassing, if you are struggling with incontinence for whatever reason, and you're having to do the extreme measures like you've got a bucket and things like that, this is brilliant. It's the only time I'm ever going to say it to you, probably the only time in your life that someone's going to say something positive about incontinence. This is points. It's something they can't debate with you. This is helping you get your PIP. This is helping you get funding so that you can afford to live, because it's expensive being chronically ill.
At the end of that video, she says that if you're someone that's fraudulent and is just trying to claim the money so that you can sit around and do nothing, get the F off my channel. This is for people who truly suffer from chronic illness. There's also quite a lot of content out there on what people call trick questions or gotchas that are asked by the PIP assessors.
Stop if you're going for a PIP assessment. They're setting traps. Familiar questions. What did you do today? Sounds friendly and innocent enough. These questions are designed to reveal things about mobility, memory, planning, cooking, self-care and so on. They want to know about your good days. Focus on your bad days. Always say, I struggle to do that. Focus on the truth, how it really makes you feel. Never answer, I'm fine. Always explain how you struggle.
And Josephine, how do some of these social media creators respond to the criticisms of them?
Yeah, so the woman who made that clip that you just heard, she's called Gemma. She runs a page called My FND Journey and suffers from chronic illness herself. She told me that this is information that should be given to everybody as a right, and that the information that she gives is available on the government website. She said to me that some of her followers can't get to, for example, the Citizens Advice Bureau, often because of their disability. And they also might find it hard to read and digest all the information on the government website. James Morell, who's the nurse and former PIP assessor, he told me that a lot of people who he works with are desperate for help, that they don't know how to describe their disabilities in the way that the PIP assessment requires. I should add that some of these creators do also offer consultancy services to help people to make their PIP applications or to go through the appeals process. Some charge around £200, some as much as £700 to help someone with a PIP application.
Josephine, thank you very much. Adam, what do you think about these, content creators, which other people might call influencers?
I think advocacy cannot be fraud. Yeah, it's support. At the end of the day, if people have a problem with these influencers, Sickfluencers, let's talk about the Citizens Rights Bureau, because there's nothing that was said there that is not said by someone supporting someone through a welfare benefit system.
It's just a different way of delivering the information. Lana, what's your take?
Well, again, what these people are doing through the medium of social media is effectively what the person from social services should be doing with somebody who's newly registered disabled. So
it's fine.
Yeah.
So, well, what I'm going to say it's fine. It's that role should really be performed by somebody from the local authority, but depends on where you live and how well these services are developed within the local authority.
But if this is the easier,
take place.
but if this is the easier way of getting the information, is it okay?
For some people, it's the only way of getting this information. And what's important to know here is that people who are applying for PIP, people who are on this journey, it's a fight for survival in many cases. It really is a fight for survival, and it's a fight against the system. And it's not nice. It is genuinely, it is
okay.
Apart from having, the issue of your disability, to have to take on this machine without anybody in your corner is really difficult. And it's not it's not the facilitator's problem.
Okay, but
it's the government's problem for not defining their criteria in a way that
Okay, Adam, can I just ask you about the language that we see in these videos that we're hearing there from Josephine? Things like how to win your case, how to beat the trick questions. Why are so many of these videos kind of pitched in a way that's almost like demonising the people from the state who are just doing their job?
I think this that kind of discourse risks harm. So scapegoating disabled people for those helping them puts lives at risk. Yeah, it fuels stigma, encourages hostile environments, and distracts from genuine policy failures. So really what these...
So why is it okay to stigmatise the people running the PIP system and accuse them of asking trick questions? Isn't that stigmatising public servants?
Not really, because if you go through the process, you will know that, the same question in the 42-page form could be asked to you in numerous different ways. So it's upon assessing the questions that are asked that it's someone's opinion that it's a trick. Okay. You're trying to be tricked.
Now, I just want to pick up on the point you made a few minutes ago, Adam, when you said you don't even like these payments being called benefits. Yeah. And you sort of explained that a bit. Lana, what do you think about that word benefits? Do you think that's the right words to describe this? Or maybe you don't. It's not something you've thought of.
Well, benefit as in PIP, personal independent.
Yeah, just the idea, the big idea that we actually even call these benefits.
So, in my opinion, there are, again, we're back to that homogenous mass that is, people with disabilities, because there are ranges within that group of people. There are people who are completely unable to look after themselves with really severe learning difficulties and physical disabilities. There are those in the middle who can and would work if the system would be slightly more supportive of us. And then there's a group that really it's quite difficult to explain to your average taxpayer why they are in receipt of benefits at all. What really should happen is that there are a proportion of disabled people who do need financial support. And there are a proportion of disabled people who probably just need access to certain additional things like a blue badge, who perhaps don't need the financial support, but actually a blue badge is really important.
Or a kind of one-off PIP rather than a continuing payment over years.
Yeah, so the financial aspect of it may or may not apply to absolutely everybody. However, what goes hand in hand with those payments, because that's where the system sort of falls down in a really, really, really big way, is that it conflates a financial support with things that actually should belong in that package.
Okay, Adam, you don't like the word benefit. What word should we be using instead in this discussion?
I'm not sure, but benefits generally are like,
so you don't have an alternative.
Well, a recognition. It's just benefits were not just easy to come by. It was something the government really needed to understand. That there are barriers in society that need to be overcome, and therefore that's what PIP is for. So it's not. I just personally dislike the word benefit because it kind of makes out that it's a mass amount of money that, and it's not. It's very hard to come by. It's not easy to claim.
In terms of the government's accounts, it is a mass amount of money. It's like it's heading for £60 billion.
I would say a mass amount of money is wasted by the HMRC. I would say a mass amount of money is wasted in the appeals process. So if you look at appeals, they went from approximately 22% in 2018 to 43% in 2021, and the last figures I have seen is 69% in 2024.
Okay. Is it ever justified for people to ask a question about the size of the bill for these payments? Is even asking the question kind of a problem for you?
Yeah, I think 100%. I mean, like we went into the last change from DLA to PIP. So DLA was disability living allowance. It moved over to personal independence payment, with the last government saying we needed to shave 20% off the welfare budget.
Okay.
But you can't shave 20% off.
Okay. And Lana, I'm guessing you'd say you have to be able to have these conversations and ask the tough questions, and you've only got a couple of seconds, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, absolutely, because if we didn't, we now wouldn't know that 70% of under 25s are claiming because they have mental health problems.
Right, and this is going to be discussed by politicians in the next few months. And that's the end of our discussion on Antisocial. Thanks to my guests, thanks to everyone who helped us out, and thanks to you for listening. You can hear our back catalogue of previous Antisocials on BBC Sounds. Bye-bye.